Hey, let's make a mess. It's just going to be a little one today because we're working on our lidded jar from yesterday, and the jar itself is still his little bottom here is still a little too wet. So I'm going to let that dry for a little bit longer. And but in the meantime, I'm going to work a little bit on trimming some of this thickness off of the rim of the lid so that the lid will fit just a touch better. So let's see, get it turned on here. Oh, hi, Beauregard. Beauregard would like to say hi. Hello. Okay, come on. Come on up a little bit. Here you go. Bloop. See? Smell it. If you concentrate, you can really smell it. Okay. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just taking my little trimming tool and I'm bringing it to 3 o'clock on the piece. I can tell this piece actually is a little bit wet also. I may need to just wait. It's also a little bit off center, which is making things just a touch difficult, but those of you who are joining me from the morning stream, welcome. Thank you for watching and hitting that subscribe button, as they say. I'm trying to make some fun content that you guys will enjoy watching. Straighten this rim out a little bit, so I made it a little bit tall on one side. And just thinning these walls just a little bit of this flange. This part that goes inside the piece. It's a flange. I didn't really make a gallery for the jug piece, or the jar, I guess I should say. It's kind of a little small cookie jar. There we go. Let's see. It's not quite flush with the top, so I'm just going to trim it a little bit more. And then what I'm going to do is, once I can get it really flush with the the lid flush with the piece the way I want it, then I'm going to put just a thin piece of plastic in between the jar and the lid, and then I'm going to leave them to dry put together. And that way they will hopefully shrink at the same rate and nothing will crack or anything like that. And it'll still all sort of fit the way it's supposed to. So let me see if I can get a nice sort of a channel in here, like between the flange and the top of the lid. That would be ideal, because then it'll really get in there nice and snug, so that the lid doesn't rattle around when you're carrying the jug places, but also it fits properly. It'll sit in there and it won't, won't lay it on top of it. It'll lie flush with the piece the way it's supposed to. You guys know what I'm saying. You know what a lid is. So yeah, essentially what I'm doing is I'm just taking off some of this excess thickness of the walls of this flange of the lid here so that it will fit nicely and snugly into our jar. So, it's still attached to this bat, so no worries. But you can see how there's still like this line right there. That's what I kind of want to get rid of. So I'm going to try and take off a little bit more thickness there and see how that goes. So. Okay, and at this point I have decided to stop thinning out the walls of the lid and instead take some off the inside of the jar. Now what you see I'm doing here with these little turds is those are actually called lugs, and those are holding my jar piece in place. Alright, so I think that's about as good as it's gonna get for fitting the flange into our jar. So now what I want to do is I want to kind of round some of this out just a little bit and shape it. It feels like it might be a little bit wet, but I kind of want that, because what I want to do is I want to sculpt a little knob thing to put on top. So, you know, to like a little knob to lift up the jar, lift up the lid of the jar. I don't know what else to call it. So yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and whisk it. Now, you may have seen earlier where I put like little blobs of clay around the jar like this so that I could trim it. Those are called lugs. I have mixed feelings about lugs. So they're obviously very, very useful because they hold your piece in place, but they can also, like, whatever part of the piece is contacting the lugs, it can kind of get messed up, right? Because you're introducing wet clay to that surface. And so if it's a surface that you like the way it currently looks, that can be a little tricky. So instead, what I usually prefer to do is I get my piece nice and centered like this, and the way I really like to do this is by holding my fingers to the point that I want to get centered on the piece, and I just sort of scoot it around until it's properly in the middle. And so in this case, this is the part I'm going to be kind of smoothing out here. We're going to pilfer Chuck's bag here. So you've got these cool little tools by Diamond Core. And they come in 3 different sizes, and they're to help you trim. So you can stick that in the middle, and then I can kind of press down just very lightly with my finger, and that'll help to hold the piece in place. Also helps if you get the bat all wet, so then the surface tension of the water that's contacting the clay will sort of hold that in place for you. So, without further ado, let's shape this guy up. I definitely like to use time-lapse for trimming because I am still really practicing at trimming, so I'm very slow. I take a long time, and I fiddle around and use a variation of tools, see what works best. You can see here I'm using a metal rib, just kind of trying to round out that lid. And in here in a minute I'll get it like a sponge. Just trying to smooth things out. Alright, so that is looking pretty good, I think. So you can kind of see, kind of rounded out that edge a little bit, just so it doesn't have quite that, you know, the sharp, flattened bottom with some of the ridges from it being on the bat. So I've gotten rid of that. So now what I want to do is I want to create my little knob. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take just some of this clay and just sculpt the piece I want out of it. I'll just try a couple different sizes here. I think I want it to be a little bit bigger than that, so I mean, this is literally just, you know, what you would do with Play-Doh. Just schmurping this clay around. It's a very technical term, schmurping. So my fear is that if I go any bigger than that, I really should have it be more hollow. So that, because if you have too much solid clay, my splash pans are not attached properly here. If I have too much clay all bunched up, then what happens is the moisture will get caught in sort of the body of the clay. That's bad, because when you raise the temperature really quickly, which is what tends to happen in the kiln, if there's moisture left in there, then the water that's left in there will boil and it will create bubbles, little air bubbles. And then the molecules of air that are in there get moving really fast and they expand and things explode. Or you'll, at the very least, you'll get things called S-cracks, which is like, you know, just what it sounds like. It's a little crack. It looks like an S. So instead, what I'm making here is just a little pinch pot. But what I actually want is for this thing to look like a bumblebee. So I'm just gonna kind of play with it and just shape it around. I'm just playing.